Hi guys, it's Debbie, and it feels like an absolute lifetime since the last time I was standing here in front of the camera. In Italy, we are now free to leave our homes, meet with our friends, go for a walk. The lockdown situation had transformed us into golems. We had forgotten the sound of the trees, the softness of the wind. But that window of freedom only lasted about half a day, as we then had to go back to work and catch up with the months left behind. Unfortunately for somebody who, like me, during the lockdown had enjoyed all the wonders of on-demand content and had watched approximately 150 films, this new positive June situation meant greatly reducing the number of films or series I could watch. But although this won't be an hour-long video, there are still some interesting titles. Compared to other months in which there were some huge classics mixed with family-friendly animated films to some terrible B-movies, I'll probably end up describing the films on this list in a way that might not sound like a multi-generational touchstone of cinema, a merger of commerce and art. It will sound more like, how exactly can I describe this movie? I think the best titles in that sense were towards the end of the month, so stick with me to the end of this video. And now, let's get right to it. In reality, before getting to the films, June actually opened with a couple of documentaries. The first one I watched was Jeffrey Epstein, Filthy Rich, a full coverage of the life and crimes of Jeffrey Epstein, an extremely wealthy man with all the right connections, but who was also accused of very serious sex offences, which of course then made people raise eyebrows about who else could have been involved in those situations. Now, I don't know how the events tied to Epstein were covered abroad over the course of the years, but here in Italy, most of us didn't really know much about Jeffrey Epstein right until last year when we heard about him on the news. So I really appreciated how I finally got to have a clear vision about the whole situation. And in addition to that, this documentary raises many interesting topics for discussion which expand from just Epstein's criminal history. This project is in the format of a docuseries, so a larger report but split into smaller chapters, which turns out to be really useful when you only have small windows of time throughout the day. I also watched another Netflix documentary which wasn't as well as put together as the one about Jeffrey Epstein, but which popped up as recommended right after I'd finished watching it, and that is Abducted in Plain Sight. The real story of a family whose neighbour and best friend turned out to be an incredibly manipulative person, to the extent of kidnapping, forcing and convincing people to do things through his fake charm. It's not as an immense story as the Epstein one, but it really makes you think how some people are so absorbed in their own desires, in fulfilling their own wishes, to the point that they will completely disregard the pain they can cause to others. Anyway, moving on from the documentaries, we have a film called The Gambler, starring Mark Wahlberg. Now, an odd fact is that for no specific reason, Mark Wahlberg is an actor who I have always seen a lot of. I'm not a die-hard fan of his, but he just keeps on popping up in film after film. Although I did check his filmography, and it's pretty extensive, there's still a lot to watch. Here in The Gambler, he portrays a man who is knees-deep in trouble due to having lost a ton of money on bets. He's borrowed a ton of money from dangerous people to fix those debts, which of course throws him into an even stickier position. All this dark side of his is then covered by his regular day job as a university teacher, but during which his negative approach to life starts slipping through the cracks. This film isn't particularly impressive, but it's an interesting analysis of disappointment, of feeling as a disappointment to others, not having a legitimate excuse for your actions, just letting everybody down. Next up, I watched an A24 film I had never planned on watching, but which I decided to give a try after so many people were saying it was their favourite A24 film. It was a huge snob at a recent film awards, and that is Climax, directed by Gaspar Noé. Now, I think Climax is meant to be a bit of an intense art film, intended for more aesthetic reasons rather than a solid storyline. For the first 40 minutes to an hour, there isn't even anything going on. It just all builds up to the main events, but in a really artsy manner, with vibrant colour palette, the pounding music, flashy outfits, bold statements, but nothing actually happens. We just get to meet a group of dancers who are having a party, but as the evening progresses, things start to get out of hand, for reasons I won't reveal because of spoilers, and which aren't even really explained within the film itself. There is a lot left to interpretation here. Actually, one of the most nerve-wracking aspects of this film is that we don't really understand what's going on. There's just something ominous setting on, but we can't really place our finger on it. So on the one hand, I can really see why so many people enjoyed it. On the other hand, it's definitely not something I would like to rewatch anytime soon. And now here comes the Gaspar Noé comment. This is my first Gaspar Noé film. At the time of filming this video, I have started watching another film of his, Love. So I've only just dipped my toes into his filmography. And I've read a lot about his films are intense. They are intentionally peculiar, they intentionally cover uncomfortable topics, they intentionally break conventional film rules, so I can't really express myself too much after just a brief look into his work. Next month I'll be able to give you a little bit more information. But is there anything lighter to speak about? Yes, the Lego Batman movie, which I basically watched because I absolutely love the original Lego movie, and I also didn't mind the Lego Ninjago movie. All these Lego films are incredible because they are set within the world of Lego, but depicted in the way people playing with Lego would imagine it and create it. I'm speaking of batteries tied to pieces of Lego, chewing gum stuck on characters, super glue as a powerful weapon, characters floating by being tied to pieces of string. Even some parts of the stories are made to sound like they were made up on the moment by somebody playing with Lego. So the dialogues will feature very funny but simple and relatable sentences. Even the new film in the franchise, which I still have to watch, is called The Lego Movie 2, the second part, which is literally just the simplest, most straightforward way a person could call a sequel. Anyway, the installment I watched this month is the one that focuses on Batman and all the characters in his world. And it's fantastic because there is a ton of irony surrounding his persona, who is always broody and a little spoiled, but also heroic and proud, but he doesn't really want to show it. So it's great for kids, but also for adults. There is a lot of self-irony. Next up, I watched a film I had completely underestimated and which I had always believed based its appeal on a bunch of motivational quotes, inspiring messages. And that film is The Pursuit of Happiness, starring Will Smith and his son, Jaden Smith. This film is actually based on a true story of a man who's at the end of all his financial resources. He's trying to care for his son, fix his marriage, find a job, try to avoid homelessness, but if you've ever been even close to that situation, you'll know that events tend to snowball and more obstacles pile on. It takes a lot of luck and willpower to plow through a situation like that, especially when you're caring for somebody else. And The Pursuit of Happiness doesn't rely too much on the inspirational, motivational, annoying quotes I was expecting. It actually shows realistically how tough that kind of situation can be, how luck is a very important element in getting you out of it, and how it takes a ton of willpower and facing pretty embarrassing or shameful situations, being judged by others for reasons which could happen to all of us. Next up is a film I'd always heard about a lot when I was younger, as it is from 2001, and which was actually quite a big horror film back at the time. That is The Others, starring Nicole Kidman. In the back of my mind, I kind of knew what this film was about. I knew where it was heading because people would always talk about it. But at the same time, I didn't know what actually went down in the story, how the events developed. Without spoilers, Nicole Kidman portrays a very paranoid woman who moves into a huge old mansion with her 2 children. They spend their days isolated from the rest of the world, even keeping all windows and doors closed, and with only the company of some maids and gardeners. But of course, the old mansion is creepy and seems haunted, and there are scary noises and scenes, including this very famous shot which has often made its way into lists of the top most scary scenes from horror movies. Next up, I watched a film starring Jake Gyllenhaal, which made me realise a long time had passed since my phase in which I would watch anything associated to Gyllenhaal's name. The film I watched this time is called Jarhead, and I must say I wasn't disappointed. It covers the topic of life at war, but instead of focusing on the action aspect, the actual warfare, it follows the daily life of the soldiers who have to stay away in the army for endless months, always waiting for something to happen, expecting the worst, although most days just pass by uneventfully. Of course, the stress of that situation, combined with the way soldiers are instructed to behave, combined with the arrogance of their superiors, obviously has an effect on a negative effect on their mental health and the way they interact. And this is something which is often ignored when speaking about soldiers and war, as they are always expected to be the toughest people out there, ready to defend us, without keeping in consideration their mental health and their way of living out there. I've actually often enjoyed researching this topic, and an interesting analysis of that environment can be found in a book called Il corpo umano by the Italian writer Paolo Giordano. Il corpo umano means the human body, and it speaks of a group of soldiers stuck in Afghanistan during the war, waiting for an actual attack, feeling like it will never happen, hoping it will never occur, but at the same time hoping something different will happen to their life. And the soldiers spend so much time together that they no longer have defined personal spaces. For example, the concept of going to the toilet is no longer considered a private event, as privacy no longer exists. Next up, I watched a film which definitely surprised me, as I only planned on watching it for a little company on a lonely evening. The film is called The Perfection, and again, there is no way I could easily describe it without spoilers, because it presents itself as a weird but straightforward story, and then halfway into it, I was grabbing my phone like, no way, no way. Avoiding spoilers, it's the story of two very talented musicians who meet in Shanghai in China at a musical event. They quickly bond and leave for a trip together, but during that trip, spoiler-packed things happen. I really don't want to describe what goes down on that trip because it would completely ruin the viewing experience. This film isn't perfect, and by the end I was kind of waiting for it to just wrap up the story, as it was being dragged out for a little too long, but it felt so good to finally be surprised by a film. It hadn't happened in a while, even if it's a cheap Netflix film. Instead, one of the last films I watched this month was an accident. I accidentally opened this film on Netflix, and then I just ended up watching all of it. But the reason why I watched it to the end was that the feeling it conveyed was similar to when you accidentally bump into something, and instead of stopping all the objects from falling, you just watch everything crumble in front of your eyes without doing anything. You know it is inevitable. It is an Italian movie called Thanks, and it's the story of a dysfunctional family/friend unit. The mother and son whose relationship is broken due to addiction, roommates who can't agree on anything, a woman who is bullied because of her weight, strict parents, and they all interact mostly within the four walls of one flat. So the film mostly revolves around their dialogues, their angry discussions, what they learn or don't learn from those discussions, potential love stories. And in contrast to the bleak environment, the bleak setting, most of these characters are woke. Am I allowed to use that term? I think one of the first sentences we hear in the movie concerns a dog wearing a tutu and the fact that we shouldn't shame the dog for her attire choices. And then as the film goes on, the story includes progressively more random scenes, and the way the characters interact is always faker, more forced. The lines were too witty, the clever comebacks were too fast and out of character. So as I was saying at the beginning of this video, there is no definitive way of describing this film, but at the same time I couldn't take my eyes off of it. And then the last film on today's very short list is Stay, a film which I never heard of, although it stars some pretty famous names like Ewan McGregor, Ryan Gosling and Naomi Watts. This film has the perfect premise for a creepy psychological horror, as the protagonist is a psychiatrist who is treating a young man who claims he can predict the future. He is also suicidal, and the psychiatrist is trying his best to dissuade him from committing the act. And as the plot goes on, the psychiatrist witnesses weirder and weirder events which make us question what we're actually watching, which one of the characters we should actually believe. And there are some very creepy scenes, including one which for some reason really reminded me of a scary jump scene from The Sixth Sense. This is so frustrating. There were so many films on today's list which I could barely describe without revealing anything. But with that, we have reached the end of today's list. Again, I apologise for not have been too present online. I hope I will be able to catch up and offer you more content, and I thank you so much for watching this video, sticking around to the end. If you enjoyed it, make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you soon in the next one. Bye.